안녕하세요.
The gleaming glass lobby of Kang Group reflected the frantic rhythm of the city. Employees hurried past, each with their own mission. Amidst the crowd, Yoon Hae-won struggled to balance a towering stack of documents as she walked toward the elevator. She barely noticed when a tall, imposing figure suddenly appeared before her. The papers flew into the air, scattering like autumn leaves. As she looked up, Hae-won held her breath. Standing before her, with a cold and meticulous gaze, was Kang Ji-hoon, infamous CEO of Kang Group. His impeccable suit and authoritative posture were enough to make anyone tremble. "Watch where you're going." His voice was low, yet carried an undeniable authority. Stunned, Hae-won quickly crouched down to gather the scattered documents. Her heart pounded, both from embarrassment and from the overwhelming presence of Ji-hoon. However, as he observed her more closely, Ji-hoon noticed something unusual. Unlike everyone else who feared his presence, Hae-won did not show fear. Instead, there was a hint of restrained irritation in her eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Kang," she said, striving to maintain her composure. Ji-hoon did not respond immediately. His eyes lingered on her for a few seconds longer than necessary before he turned and walked away. Yet, for some reason, his mind remained on that brief encounter longer than he would have liked. Meanwhile, on the upper floor, Kang Seo-jin, chairman of the board and Ji-hoon's father, observed the city through the panoramic window. "He still hasn't made a decision?" His deep voice cut through the silence of the room. Baek Min-ju, elegantly dressed, offered a calculated smile before responding. "Ji-hoon is a rational man. He knows that our marriage is the best choice for Kang Group's future." The chairman slowly nodded. "He must understand that feelings are luxuries we cannot afford." That night, Ji-hoon found himself alone in his office, unable to shake the image of the employee who had collided with him. His world had always been calculated and predictable, yet there was something about her, something different, a discomfort he could not explain, but one that, somehow, he wanted to understand. Ji-hoon was not a man who was easily distracted. His world revolved around numbers, mergers, and calculated strategies. However, ever since the incident in the lobby, his mind kept revisiting the determined expression of Hae-won. She was not like the other employees who avoided him or shrank in his presence. There was something different about her, something he could not quite understand. That morning, upon arriving at the Kang Group building, Ji-hoon encountered Hae-won again, this time in the company's cafeteria. She seemed distracted, fidgeting with her phone, a worried expression on her face. Before he could turn away, Hae-won looked up and met his gaze. "Mr. Kang." Her voice was polite, but lacked the reverence most people adopted when speaking to him. Ji-hoon crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. "Yoon Hae-won, do you usually get distracted during working hours?" She straightened up quickly, unable to hide the faint blush that rose to her cheeks. "I was just responding to an important message." He observed her for a moment before changing the subject. "Which department do you work in again?" "Financial administration," she answered, still surprised by the question. "Interesting," Ji-hoon murmured before giving her one last glance and walking away. That encounter left Hae-won even more intrigued. Why was the CEO of the company asking her such trivial questions? And why did she feel like he was studying her with such keen interest? Meanwhile, high up in the building, Kang Seo-jin was meeting with Baek Min-ju. The chairman of the board did not hide his impatience. "Ji-hoon needs to make a decision. Our agreement cannot be delayed indefinitely." Min-ju smiled confidently. "I know how to handle Ji-hoon. He may resist, but in the end, he will do what is best for the company." Ji-hoon's father nodded, satisfied. They just needed to give him a little push. Later that day, Ji-hoon received an unexpected invitation. His assistant entered his office with an elegant invitation envelope. "Mr. Kang, your family has organized a dinner tonight. Chairman Kang has requested your presence." He clenched his jaw. It took no more than a few words to realize that this was yet another one of his father's schemes. He wanted to force him to make his engagement to Min-ju official. That very night, as Ji-hoon prepared for the dinner, his mind stubbornly drifted to someone else. For the first time, he found himself questioning whether the path he had always followed was truly the one he wanted. The dinner at the Kang family mansion was a luxurious and flawless event. Seated at the head of the table, Ji-hoon observed every detail around him. His father occupied the seat of honor, as always, and beside him, Baek Min-ju smiled with the confidence of someone who already saw herself as the future Mrs. Kang. The air was thick with unspoken expectations, and Ji-hoon knew that tonight would be yet another game of manipulation. So Ji-hoon Kang Soo-min broke the silence with his deep voice. "Don't you think it's time to make your engagement to Min-ju official? After all, time is passing." Ji-hoon brought his wineglass to his lips, buying himself a moment before responding. His eyes met Min-ju's, who was watching him expectantly. But, to his own surprise, the first image that came to his mind was not the woman sitting beside him, it was Ha-eun. "I haven't made a decision yet." His voice was firm but carried an underlying message that only his father seemed to catch. Chairman Kang pressed his lips together. He was not pleased, but he also knew better than to push too hard at that moment. Later that night, Ji-hoon left the mansion and drove aimlessly until he found himself parked in front of a small cafe near his building. To his surprise, inside, he spotted Ha-eun sitting alone, completely absorbed in her laptop. Without thinking too much, he stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed, and Ha-eun looked up, her eyes widening as she recognized him. "Mr. Kang?" She blinked, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here?" "That should be my question. I thought you'd be home by now." She let out a quiet laugh, closing her laptop. "Overtime. I don't have the luxury of switching off my phone after hours like CEOs do." Ji-hoon raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the way she spoke to him. Without asking for permission, he pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "So, you have no ambition to climb higher in the company?" Ha-eun met his gaze directly, unafraid. "Ambition? Yes, but I don't want to lose my life in the process. Working hard doesn't mean giving up who I am." Ji-hoon remained silent for a moment. It was a perspective he had never considered. To him, success meant sacrifice. It had always been that way. "It seems you have your own rules," he murmured with a half-smile. She shrugged. "Someone has to, don't you think?" For the first time in years, Ji-hoon felt something different, an uncontrollable urge to know more about this woman. But little did he know, this newfound connection was about to bring unexpected consequences. The whispers in the hallways of Kang Group spread like wildfire. Rumors that the CEO had been seen with an employee at a cafe late at night fueled the gossip. Amid curious glances and hushed murmurs, Ha-eun struggled to maintain her focus on work. But the worst was yet to come. That afternoon, she was summoned to the executive floor. Her heart pounded when she realized it was not Ji-hoon waiting for her, but Kang Soo-min instead. The sharp gaze of the chairman of Kang Group made it clear that this was not a casual conversation. "Yoon Ha-eun, do you know who I am?" His voice was as cold as ice. She nodded, keeping her posture firm. "Then I assume you also understand that a man like my son cannot afford to be involved with someone like you." Ha-eun felt a tightness in her chest, but she did not back down. "If you are insinuating something, Chairman Kang, let me make it clear that my relationship with the CEO is strictly professional." The older man let out a low, disbelieving chuckle. "Do not underestimate my intelligence, Miss Yoon. Ji-hoon may be deluding himself, but I am not so naive. My son has a path set before him, and you are not part of it." Before she could respond, he slid an envelope across the table. "Here are the terms of your resignation. You will receive a generous compensation to leave the company and my son's life." Shock washed over Ha-eun. She looked at the envelope, then back at Kang Soo-min. What should she do? Give in and disappear, or stand up to one of the most powerful men in the country? "I am not a commodity that can be bought." Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded wildly. If Ji-hoon has a predetermined future, it is up to him to decide whether he wants to follow it or not. The chairman's eyes narrowed, visibly irritated. "This is a mistake, Miss Yoon, and mistakes have consequences." Later, Ji-hoon received an enraged phone call from his father. "I will not allow a childish whim of yours to jeopardize this company." Kang Soo-min's voice boomed through the room. "She needs to disappear from your life." Ji-hoon clenched his fists, feeling anger surge within him. "I am no longer a boy who blindly follows your orders. If you think you can control my life, You are mistaken. Then are you willing to risk everything? His father challenged. The Kang Group, your legacy, your future? Jae-hoon remained silent for a long moment. If that is the price of loving someone for real, then I will pay it. And so the battle between the heart and duty was officially declared. The tension between Jae-hoon and his father had reached a breaking point. In the days that followed, the CEO faced relentless pressure. The board questioned his ability to lead, investors expressed concern, and Minju intensified her efforts to win him over. But what troubled him the most was the whereabouts of Hae-won. She had disappeared. Jae-hoon learned from one of the managers that Hae-won had resigned. No message, no goodbye. She had simply vanished. His heart clenched at the thought of what she must have endured to make that decision. Determined to find her, Jae-hoon used his contacts and discovered that Hae-won had returned to her hometown, a small village in the countryside. Without hesitation, he got in his car and drove there, crossing unfamiliar roads, until he spotted a small bookstore where she used to work before moving to Seoul. Upon entering, he found her organizing some books, unaware of his presence. For a moment, he simply watched. There was something so simple and genuine about the way she moved that it made his heart ache. "Do you plan on hiding from me forever?" His voice resonated through the quiet space. Hae-won froze at the sound of him. Slowly, she turned around, her eyes reflecting both surprise and pain. "What are you doing here?" Jae-hoon walked toward her, his expression serious. Yet there was a soft glimmer in his eyes. "I'm here because you left without saying anything. I thought we had something, Hae-won." She averted her gaze, clutching the books against her chest. "It's not that simple, Jae-hoon. Your father offered me money to disappear. He told me I was a mistake." Her voice trembled slightly. "How can I fight against a fate that was already written for you?" He stepped closer, his presence dominant, yet protective. "I have never let anyone dictate my fate. And you made me see that I want something beyond success and status. I want you." Hae-won's eyes filled with unshed tears. Everything she had longed to hear was right there, spoken by him. But what if the world refused to let them be together? What if your family never accepts us? What if you lose everything? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jae-hoon took her hands in his, holding them firmly. "Then I'll build everything again, in my own way. But without you, none of it is worth it." She let out a quiet sob, feeling the walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble. For so long she had tried to push him away to protect him, but in the end, he always found his way back to her. At that moment, she knew they could no longer run. It was time to face the world together. Jae-hoon's decision to face everything for Hae-won did not take long to bring consequences. Upon returning to Seoul, Kang Group was in turmoil. His father, furious with his rebellion, made sure to pressure him into stepping down from his position. The board members were divided, and investors feared that his personal choices could jeopardize the company's future. But Jae-hoon was ready. In an extraordinary board meeting, he stood before everyone and did the unexpected. "I know many of you see me as an heir, a name that carries this company, but I am more than that. If Kang Group cannot accept that a leader is also allowed to follow his own heart, then this company does not deserve my loyalty." The room fell into silence. Kang Seo-jin, visibly displeased, stared at him for long seconds. "Are you saying you would give up everything for that woman?" Jae-hoon did not hesitate. "Yes, because an empire without meaning is worth nothing." The impact of his words reverberated through the room. Some board members admired his conviction. Others, like his father, knew he would not back down. After days of negotiations, Jae-hoon managed to keep his position, but not without one final warning from his father. "If you fail, don't expect me to be here to save you." But Jae-hoon no longer needed his approval. He had something far more important now. Months later, in a small and elegant ceremony, Jae-hoon and Hae-won exchanged vows in a private garden. Close friends and a few family members were present, but for Jae-hoon, the most important thing was the woman now holding his hand. "I promise to love you every day of my life, without fear of losing anything, because with you, I already have everything," Jae-hoon said, looking into her eyes. Hae-won smiled, feeling the tears threaten to fall. and I promise to stay by your side, no matter what happens, because you are my home, Ji-hoon." As their vows were sealed with a kiss, applause and laughter filled the air. In the distance, Kang Seo-jin watched in silence. He knew he had lost the battle, but he could not deny either son was happy. And perhaps in the end, that was enough. A few years later, Kang Group thrived more than ever under Ji-hoon's progressive leadership. And every night, when he returned home, he found Ha-eun waiting for him with a loving smile, holding a small baby in her arms. He had won. Love had won.